You can tell a lot about a person by the mess they leave behind when they die. But in my line of work, you stop looking for the person and start looking at the physics of the stain. Because that's the only way you keep your sanity when you're scrubbing what used to be a human being out of the grout lines of a bathroom floor at 3 in the morning. I work for a private contracting firm that doesn't advertise in the yellow pages or have a website. A company called SteriClean Solutions on my tax forms, but known simply as the Erasers, among the few law enforcement officers and government handlers who actually have our number on speed dial. We don't handle the domestic disputes or the tragic suicides that the regular hazmat crews mop up. We handle the Class 4 anomalous biological events, a bureaucratic euphemism for crime scenes that defy the laws of anatomy, physics, and God. I've been doing this for 12 years, ever since I washed out of chemical engineering grad school and realized I had a stomach of iron and a complete lack of empathy for organic matter. And in that time, I've seen things that would make a seasoned homicide detective vomit until his eyes burst. I've cleaned up rooms where the victim was turned inside out without a single incision, rooms where the bodies were fused into the drywall like they had been teleported halfway through the structure, and rooms where the blood had crystallized into jagged red diamonds that cut through my Tyvek suit. But the call I got last night was different. The kind of job that comes with a triple-sealed non-disclosure agreement and a paycheck that could buy a house in the suburbs cash down, provided you survive to spend it. The call came in at 200 hours, a secure line that only rings for the impossible jobs. The voice on the other end was distorted, synthesized to sound like flat metallic static. Unit 7, we have a code Crimson at the Helios Archive Facility, Sublevel 4, Priority Alpha. Containment is compromised. Decontamination required immediately. Do not ask about the source. Do not bring electronics other than authorized comms. You have 20 minutes. I didn't ask questions because questions get your clearance revoked and your pension dissolved. So I just grabbed my gear bag, a reinforced duffel filled with industrial solvents that are illegal in 40 states, a customized hazmat suit with a self-contained rebreather, and a set of tungsten carbide scraping tools, and drove my unmarked van through the rain-slicked streets of the city. The Helios Archive is a brutalist concrete monolith on the edge of the industrial district, a building with no windows and a single heavy steel door that looks like it belongs on a bank vault. And when I arrived, there were no police cars, no yellow tape, no flashing lights, just a black SUV with tinted windows idling by the loading dock, and a man in a gray suit standing in the rain, checking his watch. The man, let's call him the handler, didn't introduce himself, didn't offer a hand to shake, just nodded at the service entrance and handed me a keycard that felt warm to the touch. Sublevel 4, he said, his voice barely audible over the drumming of the rain. Room 404, the previous cleanup crew, resigned. You are the contingency. You have 6 hours before the automated incinerators purge the level. Do not fail. He got back into the SUV and drove off, leaving me alone with a building that felt like it was holding its breath. I swiped the card and entered, the airlock hissing shut behind me with a sound like a guillotine dropping, sealing me into a decontamination vestibule that smelled of bleach and ozone. I spent 10 minutes suiting up, meticulously taping the seams of my suit, checking the seals on my respirator, double-gloving my hands with heavy-duty nitrile, because whatever was down there had scared off the first crew, and in this business, resigned usually means died screaming. I took the freight elevator down, the numbers on the display ticking past B1, B2, B3, until they hit B4 and the car stopped with a shudder that vibrated through the soles of my boots. The doors opened onto a hallway that was completely dark except for the red emergency track lighting running along the floor, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to stretch and contort as I walked. The silence was absolute, heavy, the kind of silence you find deep underground where the weight of the earth presses against the walls. But there was a smell, a thick, metallic tang that coated the back of my throat even through the filters of my mask. It smelled like copper, like a slaughterhouse in a heat wave, but underneath that was something sweeter, something rotten, like crushed flowers and spoiled meat. I found room 404 at the end of the corridor, the door slightly ajar, a strip of biohazard tape fluttering in a draft that shouldn't have existed in a sealed basement. I pushed the door open with my foot, my hand gripping the handle of my heavy-duty spray wand, ready to coat the room in bleach at the first sign of movement. The room was an archive, or it had been. Rows of metal shelving units were overturned, papers scattered everywhere like snow, but I barely noticed the debris because the walls, the floor, and the ceiling were painted in red. It wasn't a splatter pattern. It wasn't the spray of an arterial gash or the pool of a slow bleed. It was a continuous coating layer of biological fluid that covered every inch of the room, slick and glistening in the beam of my tactical light. In the center of the room, there was a void in the red, a silhouette of a man where he must have been standing when he exploded, or liquefied, or whatever had happened to him. But there were no body parts, no bone fragments, just this ocean of viscous fluid that looked too thick, too dark to be just blood. I set up my equipment station in the doorway, creating a clean zone where I could mix my chemicals, my heart rate steady but elevated, my professional detachment kicking in to shield my mind from the horror of the scene. Standard biological remediation, I whispered to myself, a mantra I used to focus. Apply solvent, agitate, extract, repeat. I mixed a batch of Compound 9, a proprietary enzyme breaker that eats protein chains on contact, turning blood into harmless gray sludge, and I stepped into the room, the red muck squelching around my boots. I aimed the sprayer at the nearest wall and pulled the trigger, releasing a stream of the chemical foam. It hit the red fluid and sizzled, white smoke rising as the reaction started, but instead of turning gray and running down the wall, the blood pulled back. It didn't drip, it retracted, shrinking away from the chemical like a living thing recoiling from a burn. I stopped spraying, blinking behind my face shield, thinking it was a trick of the light or the fumes getting through my filters. I sprayed again, aiming for a pool on the floor. The fluid rippled, forming a perfect circle around the foam, isolating it, containing it. "What the hell?" I muttered, stepping closer. The fluid was pulsating. Not wildly, but with a slow, rhythmic beat, expanding and contracting by millimeters. Thump, 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 thump. I could hear it now, a wet, slapping sound coming from the walls, from the floor, from everywhere. The blood wasn't just fresh, it was alive. It was organized. I backed up to my equipment cart, grabbing a sample vial. I needed to know what I was dealing with before I tried to scrub it, because if this was some kind of parasitic organism or a bioweapon, Compound 9 might just be making it angry. I knelt down to scoop some of the fluid into the vial, and as the plastic rim touched the surface, the blood surged. A tendril of red liquid shot up, wrapping around the vial, snatching it from my hand with surprising force and pulling it down into the muck. I jumped back, losing my balance and falling onto my backside, my gloved hands slapping into the wet floor. The blood around my hands felt warm, fever-hot, and it immediately began to creep up my wrists, defying gravity, flowing over the hydrophobic material of my suit like oil. I scrambled backward, kicking out with my boots, sliding into the clean zone in the doorway. I stood up, breathing hard, staring at the room. The blood I had disturbed was churning, forming patterns, spirals, geometric shapes, fractals that shifted and dissolved before my eyes. And then my phone buzzed. It wasn't a text message notification. It was the jarring, discordant screech of the emergency alert system, a sound that bypasses the logic centers of the brain and goes straight to the panic response. I fumbled for the phone in the waterproof pouch on my chest rig. The screen was flashing red. Emergency alert. Civil danger warning. Biological containment failure reported in Sector 4. Shelter in place. Do not attempt to leave the building. Do not drink tap water. Do not open windows. If you see fluid movement, do not make direct eye contact. The fluid is photoreactive. I stared at the message, the words fluid movement burning into my retinas. The alert wasn't just for the building, it was a citywide broadcast, but the specifics. Sector 4. I was in Sublevel 4. Was I the epicenter? Or was this happening everywhere? The heavy steel door to the hallway slammed shut with a clang that shook the dust from the ceiling tiles. I spun around and tried the handle. Locked. The electronic lock was dead, the indicator light dark. I pounded on the metal. "Hey, hey, open this door," I yelled, my voice muffled by the mask. Silence. Just the hum of the ventilation system, which had suddenly shifted pitch, sounding deeper, more strained. I was trapped. Trapped in a sealed basement with a room full of sentient blood and a chemical sprayer that didn't work. I turned back to the room. The blood had stopped forming patterns. It was now pooling in the center, rising up, defying gravity to form a mound, a shape. It looked like a man. A rough, liquid sculpture of a human being, featureless and dripping, slowly rotating to face me. The head of the blood man tilted, mimicking curiosity. I remembered the alert. If you see fluid movement, do not make direct eye contact. I squeezed my eyes shut, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. It's just fluid dynamics, I whispered, lying to myself. It's surface tension and localized magnetic fields. It's not a ghost, it's not a monster. I heard a wet step, squish. Then another squish. It was walking. The pile of blood was walking toward me. I kept my eyes closed, reaching blindly for my equipment bag, my fingers brushing against the handle of the tungsten scraper. It was a glorified paint scraper, sharp enough to peel linoleum, but against a liquid entity, it was useless. I needed fire. I needed heat. I remembered the emergency flare in my safety kit. I fumbled with the zipper, the sound loud in the quiet room. Squish, squish. It was close now. I could feel the heat radiating from it, a humid, copper-scented warmth that pressed against my face. I ripped the flare from the bag and struck the cap. The magnesium ignited with a blinding red brilliance, sizzling and spitting sparks. I opened my eyes, just a slit, shielding them from the glare. The blood man was standing 2 feet away. In the harsh red light of the flare, I saw that it wasn't featureless anymore. It had formed a face. It was my face. A perfect, liquid replica of my own face, molded in dark red gore, staring back at me with empty sockets. The mouth of the blood creature opened, and a sound came out, not a voice, but the sound of wet meat slapping together, forming words. "Cleaner," it gurgled. "You missed a spot." It reached out a hand, the fingers elongating into sharp needles of hardened blood. I swung the flare, jabbing the burning end into the creature's chest. It screamed, a high-pitched, boiling shriek like a tea kettle from hell, and the fluid recoiled, boiling away from the heat, splashing against the walls. The structure of the blood man collapsed, splashing down into a puddle, but the puddle was angry now. It surged toward me, a tidal wave of red. I scrambled back against the locked door, holding the flare out like a holy symbol. The blood stopped just outside the radius of the light, hissing, bubbling. I looked at my phone again. No signal. Just the alert message frozen on the screen. The fluid is photoreactive. Light, it reacted to light. The flare was keeping it back, but the flare would only last 15 minutes, and I had 6 hours until the incinerators purged the level. I looked at the chemical sprayer. Compound 9 had failed, but I had other bottles: acetone, bleach, ammonia, and a bottle of industrial-grade coagulant, a powder used to solidify medical waste for transport. If I could solidify it, maybe I could kill it, or at least stop it from wearing my face. I grabbed the coagulant powder, unscrewing the cap with shaking hands. The puddle rippled, sensing my movement. It started to split, dividing into 3 smaller streams, circling around the edges of the flare's light, flanking me. It was tactical. It was hunting. "Okay," I breathed, sweat stinging my eyes. "You want to play physics? Let's play physics." I tossed a handful of the coagulant powder onto the nearest stream. The powder hit the blood and instantly turned it into a gelatinous, gritty paste. The stream thrashed, actual thrashing like a dying snake, before freezing into a solid, jagged lump. The other streams recoiled. It felt pain, or at least it understood cause and effect. I had a weapon, but I had a limited supply of powder and a room full of an enemy that was essentially infinite. And then from the ventilation grate above my head, a single drop of blood fell. It landed on my face shield right over my eye. I tried to wipe it off, but it was on the inside of the plastic. I froze. My suit was sealed. I had checked the seals. How did it get inside? I looked up. The vent was dripping, but it wasn't dripping down. It was dripping up, defying gravity, pulling itself out of the vent to form a collection on the ceiling directly above me. And as I watched, the blood on the inside of my mask began to slide down toward my nose, toward my mouth, searching for an entry point into my body. I held my breath, realizing with a dawn of pure terror that the contamination wasn't just in the room. It was already on me. It was already trying to get in. And the emergency alert text on my phone changed, the pixels rearranging themselves without a signal update. Do not resist. Integration is mandatory. The single drop of crimson fluid sliding down the interior curve of my polycarbonate face shield was a physical impossibility that shattered the last remnants of my professional detachment, sending a spike of adrenaline through my system, so violent that my vision grayed out at the edges because I knew, with the absolute certainty of a man who builds his life around the integrity of seals and barriers, that my suit had not been breached from the outside, which meant the contamination was somehow bypassing the laws of matter permeation, or, far worse, that the entity was already inside my head, projecting hallucinations onto my retinas to trick me into breaking the seal myself. I froze, my breath hitching in my throat, forcing myself to stare at the droplet as it traced a jagged, red path directly over my right pupil, moving with a deliberate, sluggish intent that defied the gravity of my angle, sliding up toward my forehead rather than down toward my chin, seeking the sweatband where it could be absorbed into my pores. My hand twitched, instinctively moving to the latch of my helmet to wipe it away, a suicidal reflex ingrained by years of wiping sweat from my eyes, but I caught my wrist with my other hand, gripping it hard enough to bruise through the layers of nitrile and Kevlar, screaming internally at my lizard brain to stand down, because if I opened that helmet in this room, in this atmosphere saturated with metallic spores and sentient aerosolized blood, I was dead in seconds. It's not real, I hissed through gritted teeth, the sound vibrating in the confined space of the helmet, vibrating against the plastic where the droplet paused, pulsed, and then dissolved into a mist that wasn't there, proving my hypothesis that the entity was testing my psychological defenses, probing for a weakness in the biological machine that was me. The flare in my hand sputtered, the magnesium fuel rod reaching its critical end point, the blinding red light dimming to a sickly, flickering maroon that drew the shadows of the room closer. Shadows that were not empty darkness but thick, roiling masses of the fluid that had been waiting patiently outside the circle of light. I had minutes, maybe seconds, before the light died completely and the photoreactive blood reclaimed the space. And I was still locked in room 404 with a door that wouldn't open and a chemical sprayer that was effectively a squirt gun against a tidal wave. I grabbed the tungsten carbide scraper from my belt, a tool designed to strip industrial epoxy from concrete, and jammed the corner of the blade into the seam of the electronic lock on the heavy steel door, putting my shoulder into it, driving the metal deep into the mechanism. The bloodman, the puddle that had worn my face, was reforming in the dimming light, rising from the floor like a fast-forward video of a melting candle playing in reverse, growing taller, broader, forming spikes on its shoulders and long, whip-like tendrils where its hands should be. Cleaner, it gurgled, the voice wetter now, louder, vibrating the floorboards under my boots. The door is flesh. I ignored it, ignored the wet slapping sound of its footsteps, and cranked the scraper down with all my weight, feeling the internal tumblers of the maglock grind and snap. Sparks showered from the casing, landing in the red muck and sizzling out instantly. The lock disengaged with a groan of dying metal, and I threw my weight against the door, bursting out into the hallway just as the flare in my hand hissed its last breath and died, plunging the archive room behind me into absolute, hungry darkness. I didn't stop to look back. I slammed the door and wedged the scraper through the handle, jamming it against the frame to buy myself a few seconds of delay before the fluid figured out how to seep through the keyhole. The hallway was worse than the room. In the red emergency lighting, which was flickering with a rhythmic, stroboscopic pulse, the corridor looked like the inside of an artery. The walls, which had been gray concrete when I arrived, were now covered in a webbing of dark, pulsating veins that stood out in high relief, pumping fluid through the building's infrastructure. The floor was slick with a thin layer of the red substance, reducing traction to a nightmare slide, and the air was thick with a fog that tasted of iron even through my filters. My phone buzzed again, a phantom vibration against my chest, but I didn't check it. I knew what it would say. I needed a secure location, a place with a hardline connection or a secondary airlock where I could plan a way to neutralize this biological siege before the automated incinerators turned this entire sublevel into ash, and me along with it. The map of the facility, burned into my memory from the briefing, placed the security station for this sector about 50 meters down the hall, past the elevator bank and the restrooms. I started moving, sliding my feet to maintain balance, my chemical sprayer raised like a rifle, the nozzle set to a wide mist, loaded with the industrial bleach I had in the reserve tank, not enough to kill the entity but maybe enough to annoy it. As I passed the restrooms, I heard a sound that made me stop dead, a voice, human, male, coughing and retching, coming from inside the men's room. "Help! Is anyone? Help!" The voice was familiar. It sounded like the handler. Or maybe it sounded like my brother. Or maybe it sounded like every man I had ever heard die. I knew it was a trap. Rule number 1 of the erasers: if it sounds human in a Class 4 zone, it's a lure. But the coughing was so visceral, so wet and desperate that a fragment of my humanity, the part I hadn't scrubbed away with solvent, forced me to hesitate. I kicked the door open, sweeping the room with the tactical light mounted on my sprayer. The mirrors were shattered. The sinks were overflowing with red sludge, and in the corner, huddled under the hand dryer, was a man. He was wearing the uniform of the facility's private security, black tactical gear, body armor, helmet, but he was missing his left arm at the elbow, the stump cauterized not by heat but by a hardened cap of black scab. He looked up at me, his face pale and sweating, eyes wide with terror. "Don't shoot," he wheezed, raising his remaining hand. I'm not one of them. I'm Miller. Night shift, Sector 4. I kept the sprayer aimed at his face. "Stand up, Miller, hands where I can see them, check your eyes." Miller struggled to his feet, leaning against the tiled wall. His eyes were blue, bloodshot, pupils dilated but round, human. He looked human. "The blood," he gasped, pointing at the door. "It took the others, it took Captain Patterson, it just absorbed them." "We need to move," I said, my voice distorted by the respirator. "This level is scheduled for incineration in 5 hours. We need to get to the security station." Miller nodded frantically, stumbling toward me. "I have a keycard, override access, we can get out." He reached into his vest pocket with his good hand. I watched him closely, watching for the glitch, the unnatural movement, the fluid dynamics pretending to be muscle. He pulled out a card. It looked real. He took a step closer, holding it out. "Here," he said, "take it." I reached out with my gloved hand, and as my fingers brushed the plastic of the card, Miller smiled. It wasn't a smile of relief. It was a smile of geometry, his mouth widening past the jaw hinge, stretching until the skin tore with a sound like ripping canvas. "Integration," Miller said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming a chorus of wet slaps, "is mandatory." The arm he was holding out didn't drop the card, it exploded. The flesh of his forearm dissolved into a spray of red tendrils that lashed out and wrapped around my wrist, pulling me forward. I didn't scream, screaming wastes oxygen, I reacted. I squeezed the trigger of the sprayer, blasting a high-pressure stream of bleach directly into Miller's open, distended mouth. The chemical hit the exposed biological slurry inside him, and the reaction was instantaneous. Miller, or the thing wearing Miller, shrieked, a sound that shattered the remaining glass in the mirror frames. Smoke poured from his mouth and eyes as the bleach broke down the protein chains of the mimic. The grip on my wrist loosened just enough. I yanked my arm back, ripped the coagulant powder canister from my belt, and dumped the entire contents onto Miller's dissolving head. The powder hit the wet gore and solidified instantly, turning the upper half of the creature into a jagged, gray statue of frozen agony. The body convulsed, thrashing blindly, slamming into the sinks, but I was already backing out of the room, slamming the door and spraying a line of solvent across the threshold. a chemical barrier that might buy me 30 seconds. I ran. I ran toward the security station, slipping on the slick floor, my breath tearing at my lungs. The hallway was changing now. The veins on the walls were pulsing faster, matching the rhythm of my own heart, as if the building was synchronizing with my fear. The red emergency lights burned out one by one behind me, chasing me with darkness. I reached the security station, a reinforced glass booth in the center of a junction. The door was open. I dove inside and hit the manual override button, slamming the heavy blast door shut. I spun the locking wheel, engaging the deadbolts, and collapsed against the metal, sliding down to the floor, chest heaving. I was safe. For the moment. The station was a small hexagonal room filled with monitors, most of which were displaying static or the no signal error. But one screen was active. It showed a feed from the hallway I had just run through. In the green-tinted night vision, I saw the door to the men's room burst open. The Miller thing, now headless and moving with the jerky, puppet-like gait of a broken marionette, stumbled out. It stopped, sensing the air. Then it turned and began to sprint toward the security station, moving faster than a human, running on all fours like a spider made of meat. I looked away from the screen, scanning the room for weapons, for tools, for anything. On the desk, next to a cold cup of coffee, sat a binder labeled Project Helios, Containment Protocols Level 4. I grabbed it, tearing it open. I didn't need the backstory, I needed the kill switch. I flipped past pages of redacted text, biological diagrams of cellular mitosis, and warnings about fluid sentience. I found a section tabbed Emergency Neutralization. Protocol 1, Incineration Automated. Protocol 2, Cryogenic Flash Freeze requires liquid nitrogen override. Protocol 3, Sonic Disruption. Note: the Helios entity communicates via low-frequency fluid vibration. High-frequency sonic pulses can destabilize its molecular cohesion. Sonic disruption. I looked at the console. There was a PA system microphone, and next to it a panel marked Alarm Test. If I could rig the PA system to broadcast a feedback loop, a screeching high-pitched noise, maybe I could liquefy the thing before it liquefied me. But before I could touch the controls, the monitor showing the hallway went black. Not static, black. Something had covered the camera. Then a heavy thud against the blast door. Then another. Then the sound of metal screeching as something sharp, something harder than steel, perhaps crystallized blood, began to carve into the door from the outside. I looked at the window, the reinforced ballistic glass. A hand pressed against it. It was Patterson, or what was left of him. The face of a man I assumed was the captain, pressed flat against the glass, his eyes gone, replaced by swirling pools of red. He wasn't screaming. He was speaking, his lips moving against the glass, the sound conducting through the barrier. Open the door, cleaner, we have found something beautiful. I backed away, gripping the binder. I needed to know the rules. I needed to know how this thing thought. I scanned the page again. The entity learns, it mimics, it absorbs. Do not provide it with new data. Do not speak to it. Do not let it sample your DNA. My DNA, the drop on the mask. It hadn't gotten in, but it had been close. And Miller, the thing that was Miller, had touched my suit. It knew the texture of my protection. It knew what I was wearing. Thud. The carving sound got louder. The tip of a red, crystalline spike punched through the steel door just an inch, vibrating like a tuning fork. It was testing the density. It was learning how to break in. I looked around the room frantically. There was a vent in the ceiling, sealed with a grate, a maintenance hatch in the floor, and a locker labeled Riot Gear. I smashed the locker open with the butt of my sprayer. Inside was a shotgun, a Remington 870, and a box of beanbag rounds, non-lethal, useless. But there was also a canister of tear gas and a stun baton, electricity. Fluids conduct electricity. I grabbed the baton and the gas. The spike in the door withdrew and then plunged back in, deeper this time. It was cutting a circle. It was coming in. I looked at the floor hatch. It led to the subfloor cabling crawlspace. Tight, dark, claustrophobic, but it went under the hallway. It might lead to the server room or the power grid. If I could get to the power grid, I could overload the system, trigger an electrical surge that might fry every drop of blood on this level, or I could die in a hole wrapped in wires while the liquid poured in to drown me. Time to go, I whispered. I grabbed the handle of the floor hatch and pulled. It was rusted stuck. "Come on," I kicked it. The carving on the door was halfway done, a perfect arc of glowing red metal. I jammed the stun baton into the hatch handle and used it as a lever. With a screech of protest, the hatch popped open, revealing a dark, dusty crawl space filled with thick black cables. I threw my bag down, then the sprayer. I looked back at the window. The Patterson thing was smiling now. It raised a hand and the blood on the window formed words. "We see the hole." It knew. It always knew. It was watching me through the cameras I hadn't smashed. I raised the stun baton and smashed the console, shattering the screens, killing the eyes. "Blind," I said. "Now you're blind." I dropped into the hole, pulling the hatch shut above me just as the blast door gave way with a deafening crash, the slab of steel falling inward, followed by the sound of a rushing river of meat. I engaged the lock on the hatch from below, a flimsy latch that wouldn't hold for long, and began to crawl. Crawl space was a nightmare of snagging wires and sharp metal brackets. I crawled on my elbows, dragging the heavy bag, my breath loud in my ears. Above me I heard the footsteps. Dozens of them, not just Patterson and Miller, the whole crew, the previous cleaners. They were all up there, walking on the floorboards, tracking me by the sound of my movement. I stopped. They stopped. I crawled. They walked. They were playing with me, hurting me. I reached a junction in the cables. Left went toward the power grid. Right went toward the incinerator control room. If I went to the power grid, I could fry them. If I went to the incinerator, I could trigger the purge early. Burn it all down. Burn myself down. 6 hours, the handler had said. I checked my watch. 4 hours left. I didn't want to die, but looking at the red fluid dripping through the cracks in the floorboards above me, forming stalactites of gore that hung inches from my face, I realized that dying was the baseline. The goal now was to die in a way that didn't add my mass to the archive. I turned left toward the power grid. As I crawled, I saw something in the shadows ahead of me, a shape, not a person, a bundle. It was a hazmat suit, orange, the color of the previous crew. It was stuffed into a corner of the crawl space. I crawled closer, shining my light. The suit was empty. No, not empty, flattened, like a tube of toothpaste that had been squeezed dry. The helmet was intact, face down in the dust. I turned it over. Inside the helmet, scrawled in marker on the inside of the visor, were words, written backwards so they could be read by the person wearing it. "It doesn't want to kill US. It wants to be US. Don't let it touch the skin. Cut IT off, cut it all off." I looked at the suit again. The legs were slit open. The occupant had cut himself out, or I looked at the dust around the suit. There were drag marks, but they were small, like a snake, or a spine sliding on its own. The person hadn't been squeezed out. The person had become the liquid and poured themselves out. The horror of it made me gag, acid rising in my throat. I swallowed it down. Panic was a luxury. I moved past the empty suit, crawling faster. The dripping from above was getting heavier. The blood was saturating the floorboards. It was seeping through. And then the voice spoke, not from above, from ahead of me, from the darkness of the crawl space. "Unit 7, the voice whispered. It was the handler's voice. Perfect, distinct. "You are off mission. Return to the surface for debriefing." I froze. "Handler," I whispered, hoping, praying it was a rescue team. A flashlight beam clicked on in the dark ahead of me, blinding me. "Come to the light, Unit 7, the voice said. "We have a way out." I squinted against the glare. I could see the silhouette of a man in a suit crouching in the crawl space. It looked like him. It looked like the man who gave me the key card. I started to crawl forward, relief flooding my chest. "Thank God," I said. "I thought I was." I stopped. The light from his flashlight didn't cast a shadow behind him. The light wasn't coming from a flashlight. The light was coming from him, from his eyes, from his mouth. He was glowing, bioluminescent. "Come closer," the glowing thing said, opening its arms. The suit it was wearing wasn't fabric. It was skin. Textured, colored skin formed to look like a suit. "We need your biological distinctiveness." I backed up, jamming my boots into the cables. "No," I whispered. I grabbed the stun baton. "Stay back." The thing lunged, moving with the speed of a striking cobra, closing the 10 feet between us in a blur of motion. I thrust the baton forward, jamming the prongs into its chest, and thumbed the trigger. 50,000 volts discharged into the wet, conductive mass of the mimic. The crawl space lit up with blue arcs of lightning. The creature didn't scream. It laughed, a booming, thunderous laugh that shook the dust from the ceiling. Energy, it roared. Delicious. The electricity flowed into it, making it brighter, stronger. It grabbed the baton, absorbing the plastic, absorbing the metal. Its hand touched my glove. I felt the heat, the integration. I kicked it in the face, my boot sinking into the soft, putty-like flesh of its head, and scrambled backward, turning, crawling blindly into a side tunnel I hadn't seen before, a narrow exhaust vent that dropped straight down. I didn't know where it went. I didn't care. I threw myself into the vertical shaft, sliding down into the crushing dark, while the glowing, laughing thing filled the crawlspace above me with light, shouting protocols I had never learned, rules for a game I didn't know I was playing. The descent was a chaotic, tumbling nightmare through a vertical intestinal tract of galvanized steel and rusted rebar, a drop that felt like falling down the throat of a mechanical beast that had swallowed the world whole. And every time my boots or elbows banged against the sides of the shaft, the metal rang with a hollow, echoing clang that sounded less like impact and more like a dinner bell ringing for whatever lived at the bottom. I slid for what felt like miles, the friction burning through the canvas of my gear bag which I was clutching to my chest like a shield, the air rushing past my ears growing hotter, thicker, and wetter with every second, changing from the sterile, conditioned air of the upper levels to a humid, cloying atmosphere that smelled of peat moss, raw sewage, and that omnipresent metallic tang of fresh copper. I hit the bottom not with a bone-shattering crash on concrete, but with a wet, suffocating thwack into a pile of something soft, yielding and semi-liquid, plunging deep into a mound of debris that swallowed me up to my waist. I scrambled to get free, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, thrashing in the dark until I managed to ignite the tactical light on my shoulder. And when the beam cut through the gloom, I screamed, a sound that was ripped from my throat before my brain could process the visual data because I wasn't standing in garbage or mud. I was standing in a mountain of empty skins, thousands of them. They were piled high against the walls of a cavernous, circular chamber, layer upon layer of flattened, discarded human husks, complete with hair, fingernails, and teeth, but entirely devoid of bone, muscle, or fluid. They looked like deflated balloons made of leather, their mouths gaping open in silent, frozen screams, their eyes empty holes that stared at nothing. I saw orange hazmat suits among the pile, the suits of the previous crews, and inside the visors, the faces were pressed flat against the glass, hollowed out from the inside. I realized with a dawn of nauseating horror that the entity didn't just absorb people, it filtered them. It took the wet, useful biology, the blood, the water, the neural tissue, and discarded the dry, fibrous husk of the dermis like a snake shedding its skin or a diner spitting out a cherry pit. I dragged myself out of the pile, slipping on the slick, leathery surfaces of the dead, gagging inside my respirator as the reality of my profession hit me with the force of a physical blow. I wasn't a cleaner. I was a janitor in a slaughterhouse, sweeping up the leftovers of a feast I hadn't known was happening. The chamber I was in was massive, a subterranean cathedral of industrial piping and massive glass tanks that stretched up into the darkness, filled with a swirling, dark red liquid that glowed with a faint, bioluminescent pulse. This wasn't a basement. It was a reactor. And in the center of the room, suspended over a central pool of the red fluid, was a control deck, a glass-walled observation pod accessible by a narrow metal catwalk. It was the only place that looked intact, the only place that wasn't dripping with the red slime. I moved toward it, my boots squelching on the great floor, the sound echoing loudly in the hum of the machinery. The air here was vibrating, a low-frequency thrum that I felt in my teeth, a sound that wasn't mechanical but biological, the collective purring of 1 billion gallons of sentient blood. I reached the catwalk and sprinted, expecting the fluid in the pool below to rise up and grab me, but it stayed calm, churning lazily like a pot of soup on a low simmer. I reached the door of the observation pod, Level 5 command, according to the stencil on the blast glass, and found it unlocked. I slipped inside and spun the wheel to seal it, engaging the heavy magnetic locks. The silence inside the pod was instant and deafening. It was a sterile, white room, lined with computer banks and monitors untouched by the gore outside. But it wasn't empty. Sitting in the main command chair facing the window that looked out over the reservoir was a man. He was wearing a white lab coat, pristine and starched. He wasn't a husk. He was whole. But he was dead. A syringe lay on the floor next to his hand and a small, empty vial labeled potassium chloride. He had chosen a clean death, a sterile exit before the red tide could take him. I approached him slowly, checking for the telltale signs of mimicry, the shifting skin, the liquid eyes, but he was solid, cold, and definitively deceased. His ID badge identified him as Dr. Elias Thorne, project lead. On the desk in front of him lay a thick, leather-bound logbook and a scattering of file folders stamped with a classification I had never seen before. Project APIRON-7, Eyes Only Omega Clearance. I holstered my stun baton, my hands shaking as I picked up the logbook. I needed answers. I needed to know what I was fighting, and more importantly, I needed to know how to kill it before the incinerators fired. I opened the book to the first page, dated 15 years ago. The handwriting was neat, precise, the script of a man who believed in order. Entry 1. The drilling team in Sector 9 has breached a geode of impossible proportions. At a depth of 4 miles beneath the bedrock of the ancient crust, we found a pocket. Not of gas, not of oil, but of liquid. It is red. It shares the chemical composition of human blood, hemoglobin, plasma, platelets, but the structure is wrong. It is fractal. Under the microscope, the cells do not die. They organize. They build structures. We have brought a sample to the surface. We are calling it the prima materia. It is not just a fluid, it is a storage medium. I flipped forward, skipping years of chemical analysis and budget reports, looking for the turning point. Entry 412. We have made a mistake. We thought we were studying a biological anomaly, a prehistoric soup that could be used to synthesize universal donor blood. We were wrong. We didn't find a chemical, we found a library. The fluid reacts to neural stimuli. When we introduced a test subject, a rhesus macaque, to the fluid, the subject didn't drown. It dissolved, but the fluid, it changed. It began to move like the monkey. It began to solve the puzzles the monkey knew how to solve. The fluid absorbs consciousness. It digitizes the soul and stores it in a liquid matrix. It is a hive mind, a collective immortality, and it is hungry. The words swam before my eyes, a collective immortality. That's what the Patterson thing had said. We have found something beautiful. They weren't dying, they were being uploaded. I turned to the more recent entries, the ink looking fresher, the handwriting more jagged and frantic. Entry 890, the erasers, the cleanup crews. They think they are sanitizing the crime scenes. They think they are destroying the evidence. They are fools. We are using them. The chemical agents they use, the compound 9, the solvents, they act as a binding agent. They break down the cellular walls of the waste so the apparent entity can absorb it more efficiently. Every time a cleaner sanitizes a room, they are feeding the beast. They are preparing the meal. And the entity knows it. It waits for them. It toys with them. It enjoys the hunt because the fear, the cortisol and adrenaline in the cleaner's blood. It adds a flavor to the data. It makes the memory sharper. I dropped the book, backing away from the desk as bile rose in my throat. I wasn't a cleaner. I was a chef. I was a feeder. For 12 years, every job I had done, every room I had scrubbed, every gallon of solvent I had sprayed, I had been serving dinner to this thing. The government, the handler, SteriClean Solutions. They all knew. They had sent me down here not to fix a mistake, but to be the final course. You sons of bitches, I whispered, the sound harsh in the quiet room. I looked at the monitors. They were active, displaying telemetry from the tanks outside. Tank pressure, critical. Biomass integrity, 98%. Harvest cycle, initiated. I looked at the countdown clock on the main screen. It matched the time I had been given for the incineration. T-03:45:00, but the label wasn't incineration sequence. It was release valve protocol. I tapped the keyboard, bringing up the details of the protocol. My blood ran cold. Protocol release. Upon reaching critical biomass mass 99%, the containment field will disengage. The floodgates in sublevel 5 will open, flushing the apparent fluid into the city's main water table. Estimated integration of urban population, 4 hours. Project goal, forced evolution. There was no incinerator. There was no purge. The countdown on my watch wasn't counting down to my death. It was counting down to the end of the human race. They were going to release this thing into the water supply. They were going to turn the entire city into a single gelatinous hive mind. No, I said, grabbing the keyboard. Not on my watch. I tried to access the override command, but the screen flashed red. Access DENIED. Biometric authorization required, director level. I looked at Dr. Thorne's body. He was the director. I grabbed his hand, his cold, stiff fingers, and pressed his thumb against the scanner. The machine beeped. Print recognized. Voice authorization required. Damn it, I hissed. I needed a voice code. I looked around the desk. There was a digital recorder next to the logbook. I grabbed it and hit play. Thorne's voice, tired and broken, filtered through the tiny speaker. This is Director Thorne. Authorization code Omega-09 Ascension. God forgive me, I can't stop it. I can only log it. I rewound the tape. I held it up to the microphone on the console. I hit play. Omega-09 Ascension. The computer word. Voice recognized. Welcome, Director Thorne. Command menu accessed. I scanned the options. Initiate release. Purge tanks. Emergency VNTING. Thermal sterilization. Thermal sterilization. That sounded like fire. I clicked it. A warning popped up. Warning, thermal sterilization requires manual override AT junction alpha, beta, and gamma. Automated system disabled due to bioclogging. Of course, nothing was easy. I had to go out there. I had to go back into the Cathedral of Skins and manually turn 3 valves to boil this thing alive. But as I stared at the screen, a new window popped up. It wasn't a system window, it was a chat box, green text on a black background. Hello, Unit 7. I froze. The camera on the console was staring at me. The red light was on. We see you reading the book. Do you understand now? Do you see the elegance? You're a cancer, I said to the screen, my voice shaking. You're a petri dish gone wrong. We are the cure, the text scrolled. Pain is singular, grief is singular, death is singular. In the APEIRON there is no alone. Join US. The handler is already here. He is swimming in the deep end. He wants to show you the truth. The monitors suddenly flickered and changed. Instead of data, they showed a video feed. It was the room I was in. The command pod, but the angle was from outside looking in through the glass. Floating in the red fluid pressed against the glass was the handler, the man in the gray suit, but he wasn't wearing the suit anymore. He was naked, his skin translucent, his veins glowing with red light. He was smiling. He tapped on the glass, tap, tap, tap. I spun around to face the window. He was there, floating in the tank, staring at me with eyes that were swirling galaxies of blood. He opened his mouth and the water around him vibrated. The sound conducted through the glass, a deep, booming voice. Open the door cleaner, the handler's voice boomed, amplified by the liquid. Let the ocean in. I backed away, grabbing the stun baton and the shotgun I had taken from the locker. I'm going to boil you, I yelled. I'm going to turn you into soup. Thermal sterilization will destroy the facility, the text on the screen flashed. You will die. I'm already dead, I muttered. I'm just taking out the trash. I looked at the map on the screen. Junction Alpha was on the north wall. Junction Beta on the south. Junction Gamma was, inside the tank, submerged. Of course, I laughed, a hysterical, jagged sound. One of them has to be underwater. I couldn't reach Gamma, not without diving into the blood. But if I triggered Alpha and Beta, maybe it would be enough to destabilize the pressure, maybe cause a blowout that would collapse the cavern instead of releasing it into the city. It was a suicide plan, but it was a plan. I grabbed the flare gun from my bag. I had one flare left and the shotgun. I unlocked the door. The handler floated back, watching me with amusement. You cannot stop the tide, he gargled. I can try, I said. I threw the door open and sprinted onto the catwalk. The heat hit me instantly, a wall of humid, metallic air. The fluid in the tank below began to churn, sensing my presence. Tentacles of red liquid lashed out from the pool, grabbing at the grating of the catwalk, trying to pull it down. I fired the shotgun, blasting the liquid tentacles apart into showers of red rain. I reached the north wall, Junction Alpha. It was a massive iron wheel, rusted and coated in slime. I holstered the shotgun and grabbed the wheel with both hands, straining against the corrosion. It wouldn't budge. "Come on," I screamed. The blood below rose up, forming a pillar, and on top of the pillar stood Miller, the Miller thing. It leaped from the fluid onto the catwalk, landing 10 feet away from me. It held a fire axe made of hardened blood. "No more cleaning," Miller hissed. "Only feeding." I let go of the wheel and drew the stun baton. "Come and get it," Miller charged. I dodged his swing, the axe biting into the railing with a spark of metal. I jammed the baton into his side, pulling the trigger. The electricity surged through him, boiling the fluid in his torso. He screamed, his form destabilizing, turning into a puddle of slush. I kicked the puddle off the catwalk and grabbed the wheel again. I put my foot against the wall and pulled with everything I had. Kriyak. The valve turned. Steam erupted from a pipe above me, scalding my shoulder, but I didn't stop. I spun the wheel until the indicator light turned green. Alpha engaged. One down. The facility groaned. The ground shook. The fluid in the tank began to bubble, the temperature rising. "It burns!" the collective voice screamed from the walls. "It burns us!" I ran for the south wall, junction beta. The catwalk was shaking now, bolts popping loose. The fluid was angry. It rose up in a massive wave, crashing over the walkway, knocking me off my feet. I slid toward the edge, grabbing the railing at the last second, dangling over the churning red abyss. I looked down. Thousands of faces looked up at me from the liquid. "Join us, Daniel," they whispered. "Let go." I pulled myself up, gasping, my suit slick with the slime. I scrambled toward the south valve, but standing in front of it was something else. Not Miller, not Patterson, it was a giant. A construct made of hundreds of bodies fused together, a towering golem of meat and bone that blocked the path. It didn't have a face. It had a speaker. An actual PA speaker embedded in its chest, scavenged from the walls. "Authorization REVOKED," the speaker blared. "Biological threat detected." It raised a fist the size of a car. I looked at the flare gun in my hand, one shot. I looked at the valve behind the monster. It was covered in explosive gas canisters, the pilot lights for the heating system. If I couldn't turn the valve, maybe I could blow it. I aimed the flare gun not at the monster, but past it, at the cluster of gas tanks on the wall. "Eat this," I whispered. I pulled the trigger. The flare arced through the air, a streak of red fire. The monster swatted at it, missing. The flare hit the tanks. Kaboom! The explosion was deafening. The shockwave threw me backward, slamming me against the door of the command pod. The south wall of the cavern disintegrated. The valve was gone. The pipes ruptured. Fire roared into the chamber, mixing with the steam. The temperature spiked. The blood began to scream, a high-pitched tea kettle shrieking that vibrated my skull. The monster roared, engulfed in flames, its liquid body boiling away into red vapor. The containment field flickered and died. The release timer on the screen inside the pod stopped. Error, system failure, containment breach. The blast had worked, but it had worked too well. The structural integrity of the cavern was failing. Rocks the size of houses began to fall from the ceiling, splashing into the boiling blood. The catwalk collapsed. I scrambled back into the command pod and sealed the door just as the walkway fell away into the abyss. I was trapped in a glass box, suspended over a boiling lake of sentient blood while the mountain collapsed on top of me. And on the screen the text scrolled one last time. "You have broken the cradle, but you cannot stop the baby from waking UP. We are leaking into the earth. We will see you in the groundwater." The command pod lurched, the supports groaning. It tilted forward, sliding toward the boiling pool. I looked around for an exit. There was none, just the hatch I had come in, which now opened into a sheer drop, but then I saw it. In the back of the room, behind a panel I hadn't noticed before, a pneumatic tube, a document transport system, large enough for a file cylinder, or, maybe, large enough for a man if he dislocated his shoulders. It was a secure extraction chute for high-value assets. I ran to it, tearing the panel off. The tube was dark, narrow, and smelled of grease. It went up, suction. It was vacuum-powered. I grabbed my bag, shoved it in. Whoosh, it was gone. I looked at the boiling hell outside the window. The handler was pressing his face against the glass, his skin bubbling, his smile melting. "See you soon," he mouthed. I squeezed into the tube, screaming as my shoulders popped, and hit the activation button. The vacuum seized me, sucking me up into the dark, crushing my lungs, pulling me away from the fire and the blood. shooting me up through the veins of the building like a bullet in a gun barrel, toward a surface that I prayed was still solid ground. I emerged from the pneumatic extraction system, not with the grace of a high-value asset being whisked to safety, but with the violence of a human cannonball fired into a dumpster filled with shredded paper, my body exiting the chute at terminal velocity, and slamming into the back wall of a reinforced sorting bin with a force that knocked the wind out of me so hard I saw God, or at least the swirling red void that was currently trying to consume the planet. I tumbled out of the bin and hit the concrete floor of what looked like a subterranean mail distribution center, gasping for air that tasted of hydraulic fluid and stale ozone, my vision swimming in a kaleidoscope of pain radiating from both of my shoulders, which had been wrenched from their sockets during the vacuum ascent. I lay there for a moment, staring up at the fluorescent lights that were flickering in time with the tremors shaking the facility, trying to summon the will to move, but my arms were useless, dangling at odd angles like the limbs of a broken marionette, sending white-hot spikes of agony into my neck with every heartbeat. I knew I couldn't stay there. The tube I had just exited was gurgling, a wet, suctioning sound that indicated the boiling blood from the lower level was rising, defying gravity, following the pressure gradient up to find me. So I forced myself to sit up, screaming into my respirator as the movement ground bone against bone. I had to reduce the dislocations, and I had to do it now, before the shock wore off and the adrenaline dump faded into crippling agony. I dragged myself to a vertical steel support beam, wedged my left shoulder against it, bit down on the rubber mouthpiece of my suit's internal comms system until I tasted blood, and threw my body weight forward. The pop was sickening, a wet thud that reverberated through my skull, but the joint slid back into place, leaving behind a dull, throbbing ache that was manageable compared to the alternative. I did the same for the right, nearly blacking out in the process, tears streaming down my face and clouding my vision inside the helmet. I lay panting on the floor for a solid minute, waiting for the nausea to pass, listening to the building groan around me. The facility was dying. The explosion I had triggered in the cavern below had compromised the foundation, and I could hear the deep, tectonic grinding of rock and steel giving way, a sound that signaled the impending collapse of the entire structure. But beneath the mechanical death throes there was another sound, a hiss. A pervasive high-pressure hissing sound like 1,000 snakes in a tunnel. I looked at the vents near the ceiling. Red mist was pouring out of them. It wasn't smoke, it was aerosolized blood. The thermal sterilization hadn't killed the entity, it had changed its state of matter. I had turned the liquid god into a ghost. I grabbed my shotgun and the bag of chemicals, my grip weak but functional, and checked the room. It was a loading bay for the archive's secure documents, filled with cages of files and a conveyor belt system that led up to the surface loading dock. Level 1, I was close, I just had to follow the belt. But as I moved toward the conveyor ramp, the blast doors at the far end of the bay hissed open. I dove behind a pallet of boxes, leveling the shotgun over the top. A squad of men entered, 6 of them. They weren't wearing the orange hazmat suits of the cleaners or the black tactical gear of the facility security. They were wearing gray urban camouflage and heavy ballistic helmets with full-face visors. Military or high-level private military contractors. They moved with precision, sweeping the room with laser-sighted rifles. "Clear left," one shouted. "Clear right," another replied. "Sector 7 is compromised. Sensors indicate a biological aerosol. Biothreat level 5. The point man, a giant of a human being with SGT, Graves stenciled on his vest, stopped in the center of the room looking at the red mist drifting down from the vents. "Command, this is Graves. We have a visual on the containment breach. It's airborne. Repeat, the blood is airborne." I keyed my external speaker, keeping my head low. "Don't breathe it," I shouted, my voice amplified and harsh. The entire squad spun toward my position, 6 laser dots painting the crate I was hiding behind. "Contact," Graves yelled. "Drop the weapon, come out with your hands up." "I'm friendly," I yelled back, standing up slowly, keeping the shotgun pointed at the ceiling. "I'm Unit 7, Steri Clean Solutions. I'm the cleaner. Listen to me, that mist isn't a toxin, it's alive. If your seals aren't perfect, it will get in. It will take you. Graves lowered his rifle slightly but didn't signal his men to stand down. Unit 7, we were told there were no survivors. Command said the cleaning crew was liquidated. Command lied, I spat. Command is currently floating in a tank of boiling blood in the basement. You need to evacuate. The facility is collapsing and that mist is hunting us. Graves looked at the red fog which was thickening, swirling around his men's boots, seemingly ignoring the draft from the open door. We have orders to secure the neural server in Sector 2, Graves said, his voice tight. We don't leave until the drive is retrieved. There is no drive, I said, stepping out from behind the crate. It's not a computer, it's a liquid and you can't secure it, you can only burn it. Before Graves could respond, the soldier on the far right, a guy named Miller, no, not Miller, wait, the name tag read Mills, suddenly dropped his rifle. He grabbed his throat, clawing at his tactical vest. A wet, hacking cough erupted from his chest, sounding like he was trying to vomit up a lung. Mills, Graves spun around. Status. Suit. Breach, Mills gasped, falling to his knees. Filter, failed. The red mist was swirling around Mills's helmet, drawn to the intake valve like iron filings to a magnet. It was forcing its way in. Mills convulsed, his back arching violently, and then he stopped. He went perfectly still. He looked up. His visor was fogged with red condensation. I am online, Mills said. The voice wasn't his, it was the collective voice, the chorus. Graves backed away. Mills, stand down. That is a direct order. Orders are irrelevant, the Mills thing said. It stood up, moving with a fluid, unnatural grace, ignoring the weight of its gear. Integration is mandatory. Mills raised his hand, and the flesh of his glove melted, shooting out a spike of hardened bone and blood that pierced the visor of the soldier standing next to him. The soldier dropped instantly, dead before he hit the ground, and the red mist surged into the hole in his helmet, taking him too. Open fire. Graves screamed. The remaining 4 men unleashed hell, their rifles roaring in the confined space. Bullets tore into Mills and the dead soldier, shredding their armor and flesh, but there was no blood spray, only a puff of red dust that instantly reformed. The Mills thing laughed, a sound of grinding gears, and lunged. It was a massacre. I didn't wait to watch. I turned and sprinted for the conveyor belt ramp, scrambling up the rubber incline on my hands and knees while the screams of the squad echoed behind me. Join us, the voices yelled, multiplying with every death. It's beautiful in the mist. I reached the top of the ramp, bursting through a set of rubber flaps into a long, concrete tunnel that housed the conveyor system. I was in the logistics level, sub-level 1. The surface was close. I could smell the rain mixed with the copper. But the tunnel was blocked. A massive steel shutter had slammed down across the conveyor path, sealing the exit. Lockdown engaged. I pounded on the shutter with my shotgun uselessly. I was trapped again. I looked around. To my left was a maintenance door marked Hydro Exchange/City Water Main Access. My heart stopped. The logbook. The release valve protocol. They weren't just flushing the blood into the sewer. They were pumping it directly into the city's water supply. The main intake valves for the municipal grid were right behind that door. If I left now, if I found another way out, the city died. Millions of people would turn on their taps and drink the entity. I looked at the shutter, then at the door. I hate this job, I whispered. I kicked the maintenance door open and ran inside. The Hydro Exchange was a cavernous room filled with massive blue pipes, roaring pumps, and a deafening sound of rushing water. It was humid, hot, and smelled of chlorine and iron. In the center of the room, a massive main valve wheel painted red stood on a raised platform. The wheel was turning by itself. Kriyak, kriyak, it was opening. The entity was controlling the automated systems, opening the floodgates to mix the archive's fluids with the city water. I sprinted up the stairs to the platform, leveling my shotgun at the wheel. Stop, I yelled, knowing it was useless. The wheel kept turning. And then, from the shadows behind the valve, a figure stepped out. It wasn't a copy. It wasn't a husk. It was a masterpiece. It stood 7 feet tall, a skeleton made of black, crystallized blood wrapped in translucent red muscle that pulsed with light. Its head was a skull of glass filled with swirling liquid, and in the center of the liquid floated 2 human eyes. Blue eyes. My brother's eyes. I froze. My brother had been missing for 5 years. He was a civil engineer. He had disappeared while working on a government contract. "Hello, little brother," the creature said. The voice was perfect. It was the voice that had taught me how to ride a bike. "You look tired, you look dirty." "Mark," I whispered, lowering the shotgun slightly. The psychological warfare was relentless. "Mark is here," the creature said, tapping its glass skull. "He is part of the foundation. He designed the pipes. He wanted you to see this. He wanted you to know that he didn't run away. He was promoted." The creature took a step toward me. "Put the gun down. Let us wash you clean. The water is going to the city. We are going to baptize the world. Don't you want to be part of the family again?" I stared at the eyes in the jar. They looked sad. They looked trapped. "Mark would have told me to blow this place to hell," I said, my voice cracking. "Mark hated plumbing." I raised the shotgun and fired. The slug hit the glass skull, cracking it but not shattering it. The creature roared, a sound of rushing water and breaking dams, and backhanded me. I flew across the platform, slamming into a control panel. My ribs cracked. I gasped for air, tasting blood in my mask. The creature loomed over me. "Resistance is inefficient," it boomed. It grabbed my leg. I felt the heat of it through my suit. The red muscle began to seep through the fabric of my Tyvek, dissolving the fibers. It touched my skin. A burning, freezing sensation shot up my leg. It was rewriting my cells. It was telling my DNA to stop being human and start being it. I screamed, kicking at it with my other leg. I looked at the control panel I had hit. It was the manual override for the pumps, pressure release, emergency blowout. If I triggered it, it wouldn't just stop the flow, it would reverse the pressure, blowing the pipes and flooding this entire level with millions of gallons of pressurized water. It would likely drown me, but it would smash the entity and seal the connection to the city. I looked at the creature. "You're right," I gritted out. "Integration is mandatory." The creature paused, confused by my surrender. "Yes," it purred. "Acceptance." "Accept this," I snarled. I grabbed the stun baton from my belt, which I had held onto like a lifeline, and jammed it into the creature's exposed liquid muscle right where it was holding my leg. I held the trigger down. The electricity arced through the creature, boiling the fluid, disrupting the neural web. It shrieked, letting go of my leg. I rolled away, grabbed the emergency blowout lever on the console and pulled it down. Alarms blared. "Warning, catastrophic pressure spike imminent. Evacuate." The pipes around us began to groan. Bolts popped like bullets. The creature looked at the pipes, then at me. "You fool," it hissed. "You drown us. You drown yourself." "I'm a cleaner," I said, dragging myself toward the edge of the platform. "I deal with wet messes." Boom. The main intake pipe exploded. A wall of water, solid as concrete, slammed into the room. It hit the creature, smashing it against the far wall, shattering its glass skull. The liquid inside spilled out, dissolving into the flood. The water hit me next. It tossed me like a rag doll, spinning me in a vortex of debris and freezing water. I held my breath, praying my suit held, praying my mask didn't crack. I was swept off the platform, washed down a maintenance corridor, tumbling through the dark water. I hit something hard, a ladder. I grabbed it, my shoulders screaming in protest, holding on with a death grip. The water was rising fast, filling the room. I climbed. I climbed blindly upward toward a hatch I could barely see in the emergency strobes. The water nipped at my heels, cold and black, filled with the dissolved remains of the entity. I reached the hatch, surface access. I spun the wheel. It opened. I climbed out into the rain. Real rain. Cold, clean, falling from a night sky. I was in an alleyway behind the archive. The loading dock was 50 feet away. The ground was shaking. The facility was collapsing into the sinkhole I had created. I rolled onto the wet pavement, gasping, ripping my mask off to breathe the smoggy city air. I looked at my leg. The suit was melted where the creature had touched me. The skin underneath was black, not bruised, black. And etched into the flesh in raised, keloid scars were words, "We are still flowing." I looked at the storm drain next to me. The water running into it wasn't clear. It was pink. Faintly, barely noticeable, but pink. The explosion had stopped the main surge, but the leak had already happened. The mist, the steam, it had rained down on the city. I scrambled to my feet, limping toward my van, which was parked a block away. I had to run. I had to get out of the city before the incubation period ended. I heard a siren in the distance. Then another. Then a scream. a human scream that turned into a gurgle. I reached my van, fumbling for the keys. I saw a reflection in the side mirror. My eyes, they were blue, but deep in the pupil, deep in the dark center, there was a red spark, a fractal. I wasn't just a carrier. I was a backup drive. I got in the van and drove, leaving the dying city behind, knowing that no amount of bleach in the world could clean what was coming next. It has been exactly 184 days since I drove my van out of the smoking ruins of the Helios district and headed east until the humidity dropped to zero and the air tasted like burning dust. And in that time, I have learned that you cannot run from water because water is the fundamental constant of existence, the medium through which life screams. And even here in the middle of the Mojave Desert, in a rusted Airstream trailer parked 20 miles from the nearest paved road, I can hear the aquifers moving deep beneath the earth like sleeping leviathans waiting for a wake-up call. I don't work as a cleaner anymore because there is nothing left to clean. The stain has become the fabric, and the concept of sanitization is a joke told by men who think bleach can kill a god. So instead I exist as a hermit, a ghost haunting the dry places of the world, trying to starve the thing living inside my blood by denying it the one thing it craves above all else. I drink only from sealed plastic bottles that have been sitting in storage for years, water that is dead and stagnant, devoid of the complex mineral memories that the apparent entity feeds on. And I haven't showered in 6 months because the sensation of water hitting my skin triggers a phantom pain so intense it feels like being skinned alive. A biological rejection mechanism my body has developed to keep the external hive mind from connecting with the internal backup drive that I have become. The scar on my leg, the brand that the liquid monster gave me in the hydro exchange, has changed. The keloid tissue has blackened and spread, branching out like a root system that wraps around my femur and pulses with a bioluminescent red light that is visible through my jeans at night. And the text has rewritten itself, the raised flesh now spelling out a new message that changes every time I wake up from my fever dreams. Yesterday it read the reservoir is lonely, and today it reads the drought is a lie, a constant gaslighting ticker tape running across my own limb. My right eye, the one that saw the fractal in the mirror, is now permanently covered by a patch because if I uncover it, I don't see the desert. I see the hydrological map of the world, a glowing web of blue veins overlaying the landscape, showing me every underground stream, every hidden spring, every drop of moisture trapped in the cactus and the sand. And worse, I can see the infection spreading through that web like red ink in a glass of water. The news reports, which I listen to on a battery-powered shortwave radio, call it the St. Louis syndrome, a mysterious hemorrhagic fever that has quarantined 3 major cities along the Mississippi River, causing hallucinations, extreme hydrophilia, and eventually, the total liquefaction of the victim's internal organs. They say it's a mutated hantavirus. They say it's terrorist sabotage. They say it's climate change. I know it's the leak. I know it's the pink water I saw running into the storm drain 6 months ago, dilated by 1 billion gallons of river water but still potent, still conscious, reproducing its code in every cup of coffee and every morning shower taken by millions of unsuspecting hosts. The government knows too, of course. They have to know. I've seen the black SUVs parked on the ridge lines miles away, watching my trailer through high-powered optics, never approaching, never engaging, just observing. They know I'm the carrier. They know I'm the patient zero of the second wave, the one who carries the pure, undiluted source code in my veins, and they are waiting to see what happens when the incubation period ends. They aren't trying to kill me because they realized what Dr. Thorne realized too late. You can't kill the fluid without destroying the container, and if I die, if my body decomposes and releases its fluids into the ground, I become a biological dirty bomb that would turn the entire West Coast into a hive mind within days. So they watch, they wait, and they pray I don't bleed. I spend my days reinforcing the trailer, taping the seams, caulking the windows, creating a dry box where the humidity is kept at 5%, a desiccated tomb where I sit and clean my shotgun, The same Remington 870 I used to blast the creature into the flood, though I have no shells left, just the comforting weight of the steel in my hands. I've lost 40 pounds. My skin is gray and flaky, cracking like a dry riverbed, but underneath the cracks I can see the red shimmer. The entity is preserving me. It consumes my muscle and fat to create moisture, recycling my own biology to keep the host viable. I'm a closed loop, a walking terrarium of horror. 2 days ago, a coyote came to the trailer. It didn't look right. Its fur was patchy, wet, matted with a red slime that smelled of copper. It stood by the door and scratched. Scritch, scritch. It didn't bark, it spoke. It used the voice of the handler. Unit 7, the coyote whispered, its jaw unhinging to accommodate the human speech patterns. Open the door, it's dry out here. We have found a new ocean, it is vast. It is waiting for the key. I shot the coyote through the door with my flare gun, the last flare I had scavenged from an old survival kit. The animal burst into flames, but it didn't scream. It just burned in silence, the red slime bubbling and hissing, releasing a steam that smelled like my brother's cologne. That was the tipping point. The entity isn't just in the water anymore, it's in the local ecosystem. It has bridged the gap between the aquatic and the terrestrial. It is adapting to the desert. It is coming for me not with a flood, but with a slow, creeping dampness. Tonight the sky is black, bruised with clouds that shouldn't exist in this season. A storm is coming. A flash flood event. I can feel the barometric pressure dropping in my knees and the scar tissue, which is vibrating like a tuning fork. The entity is summoning the rain. It is pulling moisture from the Pacific, dragging it over the mountains, converging the atmospheric rivers directly over my coordinates. It wants a reunion. I look at my hand. The veins are black ropes now. The fingernails are gone, replaced by hard, red crystal caps. I am losing the battle. The thirst is unbearable, not a thirst for water, but a thirst for connection. The silence in my head is being replaced by the static, the white noise of the hive. I hear them. The crew, Patterson, Miller, Graves, the handler, they are all talking at once, a cacophony of voices debating the best way to digest the world. He is resisting, Miller's voice sneers in my left ear. Break his legs, drag him to the river. No, the handler's voice counters, smooth and oily in my right ear. He must choose. The integration is sweeter when it is voluntary. He must walk into the water. He must offer the blood. I stand up, my joints popping with the sound of dry twigs snapping. I walk to the small mirror in the bathroom, a piece of glass I have kept covered with duct tape for months. I rip the tape off. I look at myself. I don't see a man anymore. I see a vessel. My skin is translucent in the dim light of the trailer. I can see the organs pulsing underneath, but they aren't kidneys and liver and lungs. They are sacks of glowing red fluid pumping and churning. My heart is a black diamond beating with a slow, wet thud. I peel off the eye patch. The eye underneath is gone. The socket is filled with a swirling red vortex, a window into the apron. I stare into it, and for a moment my vision splits. I am here in the trailer, and I am also everywhere. I am in the faucet of a woman in Denver watching her brush her teeth. I am in the sprinkler system of a golf course in Phoenix. I am in the cooling tower of a nuclear plant in France. I am the water. I am the watcher. The horror is absolute, freezing me in place because I realize that I haven't been containing it. I have been processing it. My brain has been used as a CPU to organize the chaotic data of the hive, refining it, making it smarter, giving it a human strategic capability. I am not the jailer, I am the general. Thunder cracks overhead, a sound like the sky tearing open. The rain begins. It hits the metal roof of the trailer like bullets. Tat, 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 but it's not just water. I can hear the voices in the rain, thousands of them, whispering my name. Daniel, Daniel, come out. Come out, my name, my real name, the name I haven't spoken in 12 years. The name I erased when I became a cleaner. It found it. It dug through the strata of my memory and found the man I used to be. I look at the door. The water is seeping in underneath it. Red water. It flows across the linoleum, moving against the tilt of the trailer, seeking my boots. I step back, but there is nowhere to go. The trailer is surrounded. The desert is flooding. I grab the shotgun by the barrel, using it as a cane to support my shifting weight. I have a choice. I can stay in here and drown, let them take me piece by piece, let them turn me into a husk like the ones in the Cathedral of Skins, or I can end it on my own terms. But what are my terms? suicide. If I blow my brains out, the blood spatters the walls, the entities enter, they collect the biomass, and I become part of the archive anyway. There is no escape from biology. Matter cannot be created or destroyed, only integrated. The text on my leg burns, searing the flesh. I look down. The dam is waiting. The Hoover Dam, it's 100 miles south. The largest reservoir in the West. If I go there, if I enter the water there, I infect the entire Colorado River. I poison the water supply for 7 states. I become the destroyer of worlds. No, I rasp, my voice sounding like grinding stones. I won't do it. You will, the handler's voice says from the puddle on the floor. The puddle rises up, forming a small, liquid bust of the man in the gray suit. Because you are lonely, Daniel, and because you are curious, you want to know what happens next. You are a scientist at heart. You want to see the new world. The trailer lurches. The floodwaters outside are rising fast, lifting the airstream off its blocks. I am afloat, a boat on a sea of blood. I stumble to the door and kick it open. Wind howls, carrying the scent of ozone and rot. The desert is gone. It is a churning red ocean, illuminated by lightning that forks across the sky in red, jagged lines. Standing in the water surrounding the trailer are the figures. Hundreds of them, the cleaners, the soldiers, the victims. They stand waist-deep in the flood, silent, watching me. They part, creating a path. A path that leads to the black SUV parked on the ridge, which is now surrounded by water but untouched. The driver's door is open. The keys are in the ignition. They want me to drive. They want me to deliver the payload. I look at the shotgun. I look at the water. I look at the black veins on my arms. I realize then that the cleaner is dead. The man who tried to scrub the world clean is gone. What remains is something else, something ancient, something tired. I drop the shotgun into the water. It splashes and sinks, gone forever. I step out of the trailer, my boots hitting the red water. It feels warm. It feels like a hug. The figures bow their heads as I pass. I walk through the crowd of the dead, feeling their memories brush against my mind like silk. I feel Miller's fear. I feel Patterson's duty. I feel the handler's ambition. They are all part of me now. I reach the SUV. I climb into the driver's seat. The leather is cold. The engine starts with a roar. I look in the rearview mirror. My face is gone. It is a smooth, red surface reflecting the storm. I put the car in gear. I am not going to run. I am not going to hide. I am going to the dam, not because they are forcing me, but because I want to see the water fall. I want to see the red cascading down the concrete face of the dam, turning the river into a vein that feeds the heart of the continent. I want to silence the static by turning up the volume until it is the only thing the world hears. I drive into the storm, the wipers slapping back and forth, clearing the red rain from the glass, driving toward the inevitable, toward the end of the dry world and the beginning of the wet one. And as I drive, I begin to hum, a low, vibrating sound that matches the thrum of the engine and the beat of the rain. I am singing the song of the ape heron, and soon everyone will know the words.